Story 1. The time froze at 3:17 a.m. I've never believed in omens or curses. I still don't, not exactly, but I can't deny what happened after I inherited my grandfather's brass pocket watch. It was the only thing left to me, resting in a small velvet box that smelled faintly of tobacco and old metal. The ticking was faint, but unmistakably present, like a tired heartbeat refusing to stop. I placed it on my nightstand the first evening I brought it home, not thinking much of it. Just an old man's keepsake, nothing more. That night, I woke up to silence so complete it felt unnatural, the kind of silence that presses into your ears. I glanced at the watch. It had stopped, the hands frozen at 3:17 a.m. For a second, I laughed to myself. Old clock, probably just broken. But when I rolled over to check my phone, the screen wouldn't turn on. The digital clock on the microwave blinked when I walked to the kitchen. That's when I heard it, screaming. It came from the apartment next door, sharp and panicked. Then the lights flickered and came back. I tried not to make too much of it. The power outage explained most of it, I told myself. I even joked about it the next morning to a friend, saying maybe Grandpa's watch knew when the grid would fail. He didn't laugh, just stared at the watch in my palm and asked if I'd really heard screaming. It might have been a bad dream, I muttered. But I knew better. I didn't dream that kind of fear. The second night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed watching the red digits on my alarm clock shift slowly. At 3:16, I reached for the watch, still ticking. I held it in my hand, its brass surface colder than expected. Then, right on cue, it stopped. 3:17 a.m. I stared at it, waiting for the power to fail, for the scream. But nothing happened. No blackout, no voice. Just my own breathing. And then, a knock. Gentle, rhythmic, coming from inside my closet. I didn't move, couldn't. The knock came again, 3 soft taps, followed by silence. I slowly sat up, expecting to hear more. Nothing. I stayed awake until dawn, the watch still frozen, my hands clammy around it. When I checked the closet in the morning, there was nothing there but my winter coat, swaying slightly like someone had brushed past it. I decided to hide the watch in a drawer, out of sight, out of mind. But that night, the ticking returned, faint but clear, as if the drawer amplified the sound instead of muffling it. I left it alone. When I woke up, the drawer was open. The watch lay neatly on my pillow. 3:17 a.m. again. I started staying up. Coffee, cold showers, pacing. My eyes burned from exhaustion, but I refused to let it happen without me seeing it fully. The 5th night, I sat in my hallway with every light on. At 3:17, they all blinked off. Just once, like a power hiccup. And in that second of darkness, I swear I saw movement at the end of the hall. Not a person, just a shift in the air, like someone had been there and wasn't anymore. I spoke to a neighbor the next day, cautiously. "Did you hear anything the other night? A scream?" She looked past me as if she hadn't heard the question at all. "That guy who used to live next door, he died last week. Heart attack. They think." That was the same night I first heard the scream. The same night the watch stopped. I thought about destroying the watch, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. It didn't feel right. Instead, I left it at the back of a drawer. Again, this time taped shut. I put books on top, a chair. At 3:17 a.m., I woke up with the ticking on my nightstand, louder than ever. My phone was dead. The room was colder than usual, like the air itself had thinned. It's been a week. I've tried sleeping elsewhere, even a motel. The watch follows. Not physically, it's still in my apartment, but I hear it. The ticking, always at 3:17, and always followed by something. A creak, a whisper, a presence just out of view. I don't know what it wants. I only know that it notices me now. Last night I heard my own voice. It came from the bathroom mirror. Just one word, repeated softly. Stay. I don't know if it was me talking in my sleep, or something mimicking me. I didn't open the door. I couldn't. Tonight, I'm going to break the watch, if I can. But part of me wonders, if it stops ticking for good, what else might start? If anyone else has experienced something like this, please let me know. Am I going crazy? Or is 3:17 a.m. just not meant to pass? Story 2. Secondhand minutes. I only bought the clock because the guy looked like he needed the $5 more than I did. It was chipped, dusty, with a faded brass frame and a face that had once been white. Still, it ticked steadily when I gave it a shake. That was enough. I brought it home, wiped it down, and set it on the shelf above my TV. Didn't think twice. Until the crash. 3 nights later, I was watching TV with the window cracked open. The diner across the street, Florence's, was still lit, a few stragglers finishing pie or coffee. Then, right as I reached for the remote, I heard it. The screech of tires, a shattering explosion of glass and metal. A silver SUV had plowed straight through the front window. The clock stopped ticking. At first, I didn't make the connection. I stood by the window, frozen, watching smoke rise and people run. My hands trembled when I called 911. By the time I turned back to the room, the silence felt wrong. The clock read 11:46 p.m. I noticed because I was still holding the remote, and the red LED on the TV screen blinked as I shut it off. That same red blink reflected off the clock's face. Still. Stopped. I didn't touch it. Something told me not to. The next morning, the scene across the street was roped off, windows boarded. A handwritten sign read, "Closed until further notice." I glanced at the clock. Still 11:46. Still silent. I figured the crash must have sent some kind of vibration through the building. Something mechanical got knocked out of place. Logical. But that night, just as I was about to go to bed, I heard it start ticking again. It ticked normally through the evening. I even timed it with my phone. Nothing strange. I was brushing my teeth when I glanced at it. 11:45 p.m. I dried my hands, walked out of the bathroom, and stood in the dark living room. It ticked once more, then stopped. 11:46 p.m. again. Same second, same stillness. I didn't sleep. My brain kept spinning, trying to disassemble the coincidence into something rational. Maybe I'd wound it weird. Maybe it had a faulty gear that slipped at the same time every night. I even looked up clock mechanisms, watched repair videos, but none of that explained why it always ticked during the day and stopped, dead, at exactly the same second each night. By the 4th night, I waited in the dark, sitting across from it. I didn't move, didn't blink. I heard the final tick, then silence. I swear the room changed with it, like the air got denser, quieter, heavier, as if something else had arrived. I stopped opening the window after that. I couldn't shake the idea that maybe it wasn't just recording the moment of the crash, but reenacting something, holding open a minute that wasn't mine, a minute borrowed from someone else's disaster. And if that was true, I didn't want to invite anything in. I tried removing the clock. I wrapped it in a towel, stuffed it in the closet. That night, the ticking echoed from the shelf. 11:45. Tick, tick, stop. I opened the closet. The towel was warm to the touch, faintly vibrating. Inside, the clock face still read 11:46 p.m., as if it never left the wall. That's when I started checking the diner footage, public records, police reports. The crash happened at 11:46:18 p.m. Every night the clock dies at that precise moment. No seconds early, no seconds late. And now when I stand close to it, I sometimes hear something else. Not the ticking, but a faint sound behind it. Glass, screaming, metal folding inward. It's been 3 weeks. The diner's still closed. I've unplugged every clock in my place except that one. I can't stop watching it. Can't look away when it nears that minute. Part of me wonders if I'm slowly becoming a part of it. Another set of seconds trapped behind the glass. If anyone else has found something like this, an object that refuses to let go of one moment, please tell me. I need to know if I'm alone. Story 3. The clockmaker's basement. They told me it was just a clean out. Nothing complicated. An old shop, out in some forgotten corner of rural Pennsylvania. I'd done dozens of these before. Abandoned pharmacies, antique barns, even a funeral home once. But there was something about this place the second I stepped in. Like it had been waiting for me. The shop looked like time had stopped mid-sentence. Dust blanketed the counters. Papers curled with age. The air was thick, musty with a sweet metallic undertone I couldn't place. The front room was uneventful. What got to me was the door in the back. Faded lettering. Private workshop. I didn't have to go down there right away, but something pulled at me. I wanted to get it over with. The stairs creaked, but held. The light flickered once before it steadied. The basement was wider than I expected. Shelves lined with gears, springs, tiny glass jars of screws, labels handwritten in German. But what stopped me, what really stopped me, were the clocks, wall-mounted, mantle, cuckoo, dozens of them, maybe more, and every single one of them frozen at exactly 2:12. I didn't panic. I just stood there, listening, except there was nothing to hear, not even the hum of the light. The silence was absolute, and yet it buzzed, like pressure behind my ears. My own breath felt too loud. I checked my phone. It was 2:12 p.m. That gave me a chill, sure, but I'm not superstitious. Probably just a fluke. I worked fast after that, boxed what I could, left the clocks for last. I didn't want to touch them. Every time I looked at one, I swore the hands twitched. Not visibly, but like a trick of the eye. You know when something moves just outside your peripheral vision? That kind of thing. I didn't say anything to the client. Just told him I'd finish the rest in the morning. That night I stayed at a roadside motel, one of those places with buzzing neon and paper-thin walls. I was out cold by 10, but at some point, I don't know when, I shot up in bed like I'd been yanked from underwater. Couldn't breathe, my chest tight, palms wet. I had no idea what the dream was, just that I needed to escape it. I turned to the bedside clock. 2:12. The second hand wasn't moving. I tapped the top. Nothing. Pulled out my phone. Dead. The charger light was off. No power. I tried the lamp. No light. I sat there for I don't know how long. Eventually the clock ticked once, just once. Then it stopped again. The next day the client called, said the shop had been broken into overnight. Nothing stolen, but the clocks all reset, all now pointing to 2:12. I didn't go back. Told him I was done. He didn't argue. It's been 2 weeks. Every night since then I've woken up at exactly 2:12. No alarm, no dream I can remember. Just this sudden, sharp awareness. Like something's watching me. I tried getting rid of all clocks in the apartment. Doesn't matter. My body just knows. I haven't told anyone. Not really. But if anyone else has experienced something like this, please let me know. Am I going crazy? Story 4. Pawn Shop Time Trap. It was one of those biting late October days in Chicago where the wind slices between buildings like a warning. I ducked into a small pawn shop I'd never noticed before, wedged between a shuttered barber and a boarded-up bakery on West Belmont. I just needed to kill time before my seminar. The bell above the door didn't ring when I entered. That's probably the first thing I should have paid attention to. Inside, the lighting was dim and dusty. Shelves sagged under old cameras, radios, and tangled cords. That's when I saw it, nestled in a velvet tray of mismatched jewelry, a wristwatch, gold-toned, the glass cracked in a jagged semicircle like a spiderweb frozen mid-crawl. But the hands were elegant black with the faintest shimmer. I held it up to my ear. It was ticking. The guy behind the counter barely looked up when I paid $20 cash. Back at the dorm, I set it on my desk, fascinated. It stopped ticking around 5:41 p.m., just as I was about to leave for dinner. I remember checking twice, once when it was still ticking, then again when it wasn't. The second hand froze. I tapped the glass. Nothing. Later that evening, the fire. Alarm blared across the floor. People groaned and shuffled out into the cold. It turned out to be a false alarm. Steam from someone's shower, they said. I didn't think much of the timing until the next day. I rewound the watch manually, just for the feel of it. A quiet click. Then, to my surprise, it started ticking again, for exactly 4 hours. Then, 5:41, dead again. I stared at it longer than I should have. Same pause, same silence. I left it on my windowsill after that, like a decoration. But something about it unsettled me. How it refused to be random. A week passed. Papers, lectures, long nights. The watch stayed dead until I wound it again one Thursday afternoon. Again, it ticked for a while. Again, it stopped at 5:41. That night, someone on my floor had a seizure. Paramedics came. The whole hallway was lit in red and blue. It wasn't until later that I checked the watch again, still resting on the sill. 5:41. The hands unmoved, just like before. My roommate started avoiding our room, not because of the watch, I think, but the way I stared at it sometimes, trying to catch the exact moment it died. Once I swore the ticking sped up right before stopping. Another time, the second hand jumped, skipped a beat, just once, but enough to make me freeze. It was like the watch anticipated something, not measured it, knew it. I looked up the pawn shop again, couldn't find it. Google Maps showed a blank lot. Street View from a year ago had a different store in its place. I walked back to the block, twice. Nothing, not even a gap where it might have been. I even asked a local store clerk. He frowned and said no pawn shop had been there for at least 3 years. That was the first time I felt afraid in a way I couldn't explain. I tested the watch with friends. Left it in other dorms, reset it during parties, kept it in my bag for days. No change. Each time I wound it, it lived for a while, then died at 5:41. It didn't matter where I was or what I was doing. One day, the fire alarm went off during a midterm. Another day, a girl in the campus cafe had a breakdown right at that time, flipping her tray and sobbing into a muffin. Still, I never told anyone what I was tracking. I didn't want to sound paranoid, but I started planning my days around it, leaving buildings early, skipping events, even lying about where I'd be. Once, I sat in the library stairwell at 5:40, clutching the watch in my hand, waiting. Nothing happened, but the silence felt thicker. And when the second hand stopped, I swear the light above me flickered. I've stopped winding it, mostly, but sometimes I can't help myself. Like tonight. I twisted the crown, set it ticking, and placed it on my desk again. It's 5:37 now. Outside, I hear footsteps in the hallway, slow, deliberate. No one should be on this floor. The RA said the wing is under maintenance. I turned off my lamp. I'm typing by screen light. The second hand is jittering, not ticking, jittering. Now it's 5:41. The watch just died, and the footsteps have stopped, but there was no door click, no sound of retreat, just absence. I'm not moving. I don't want to look up from this screen. The light is buzzing, softly. Something in the silence feels stretched, like it's waiting too. If anyone else has ever owned a watch like this, one that dies at the same time no matter where you are, please tell me. Please. I need to know if I'm the only one hearing these footsteps. Story 5. Old time, new apartment. I moved into the apartment in Queens on a Wednesday. Small, overpriced, but mine. My lease started that morning, and by late evening, I was still surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and the stale scent of fresh paint. At some point, I decided to hang the one heirloom I had kept from my great-uncle, his old grandfather clock. It was heavier than I remembered. I placed it at the end of the hall, just opposite my bedroom. By midnight, it was ticking steadily. That gave me a strange sense of comfort, like someone else was awake in the place. I woke up suddenly at 1:38 a.m. I remember the exact time because the ticking had stopped. That silence wasn't just absence. It had weight. I rolled over and stared into the hallway, just barely lit by the glow from my modem. The clock stood there, still. Then came a knock. Not a polite one, sharp, deliberate. From the direction of the fire escape outside my bedroom window. I froze, heart stuck mid-beat. The knock didn't repeat. I waited in the dark, barely breathing, hoping it had been something explainable. A loose shutter, maybe. But the air was still, and the night too quiet. I finally got up, tiptoed to the window, and peeked through the blinds. No one. Just the city lights below and the black iron skeleton of the fire escape pressing against the brick wall. The next morning, I wound the clock again. I had to use a key hidden in its base. It ticked to life as if nothing had happened. I even laughed a little, chalking the whole thing up to moving stress. That night, I fell asleep with a podcast playing, something about dream analysis. But once again, I woke up to silence. 1:38 a.m. Exactly. I didn't even need to check the clock. I knew. This time, the knock was softer. A single thump, followed by what I can only describe as a slow drag, like something brushing against the outer frame of the window. I jumped up and turned on every light. Still, nothing. I opened the window slightly, called out. Just the hum of distant traffic and a faint smell of metal. The fire escape was empty, still warm from the sun earlier. I locked the window. Over the next few days, I tested the clock obsessively. I wound it each morning and kept my phone's timer synced to it. No matter what I did, it stopped at 1:38 a.m. I even moved it to the living room. Still, same time. I called my mother, asked if she knew anything about the clock's history. She said my great-uncle was a quiet man, died in his sleep. No weird stories, no secrets, just silence. I tried ignoring it, wore earplugs to bed, turned the clock to face the wall. But at 1:38, I always woke up. Even without hearing the knock, my eyes would snap open. The worst part wasn't the silence. It was the expectation. Like something was waiting for me to notice it. I began to feel watched, not just at night, but during the day, too. From the hall, from the window, from inside. One evening, I stayed up deliberately, watching the clock. At 1:37, the ticking grew faint. Then, nothing. Silence dropped like a curtain. A full minute passed. I held my breath, and then came the knock. 3 short taps. Not from the window this time, but from inside the hallway. I spun around so fast I nearly dropped my phone, but the hall was empty. The clock's face stared back at me, frozen. I left the lights on after that. Every night. I also started locking all windows, even during the day. I stopped inviting people over. I didn't want to explain the clock, or the smell that had started to seep into the hallway at night. Metallic, like rust and rain. And sometimes the faint sound of gears turning, even though the clock was still. I considered getting rid of it, but something held me back. Maybe guilt, maybe fear, maybe something else. I dream of the clock sometimes, standing at the end of a long corridor, ticking louder than possible. In those dreams, I'd hear the knock again, but in them, I never woke up in time to stop it. Now, 1:38 is a part of me. My body knows it. I no longer need alarms. I wake in silence, listen, wait. The knock isn't every night anymore. Sometimes it skips, but it always comes back. Always. If anyone else has something in their house that won't let them sleep, please tell me. I need to know I'm not the only one. Story 6. The clock in room 309. I've worked night shifts in hospice units, ERs, and rural clinics where silence feels heavier than pain. But nothing's clung to me like what happened in Denver last February. The agency booked me into a mid-range hotel near the hospital. One of those places with vending machines from the 90s and that thin, persistent smell of Lysol masking something older. My room was 309. The only odd thing at first was the clock above the bed. It was analog and dusty, and the hands were frozen at 12:03. The clerk downstairs just shrugged when I mentioned it. "Yeah, it's broken," he said, like that explained why it was still mounted there. I didn't press. I was too tired after driving 6 hours in snow. The room was cold, even with the heater humming. I unpacked slowly, keeping my coat on, distracted by the faint mechanical hum from the hallway. Probably the old ice machine. By 11:30 p.m., I was in bed, scrolling through messages. I remember the glow of my phone lighting the room while everything else stayed dim. The overhead light flickered once but didn't go out. I assumed it was the wiring. My legs were under the covers, but I swear, just as I was about to doze off, I felt something brush against my shin. cold, like the back of someone's hand. I yanked my leg back and sat up. I stared into the dark space near the edge of the bed. Nothing. The heater buzzed steadily. The hallway was quiet. I got up, turned on every light, checked the bathroom, the closet. My breath fogged the mirror slightly, which struck me as odd. Shouldn't the room be warmer by now? I rationalized. Static electricity, maybe. Sheets shifting. Fatigue playing tricks. Still, I left the lights on and climbed back into bed. I tried not to look at the clock above me, but the broken hands seemed to cast longer shadows than they should have. My phone read 12:02 a.m. I remember watching it turn, slowly, calmly, to 12:03. That's when the ice machine started. Not just the usual hum. It groaned. Something metallic crunched, like it was chewing itself from the inside. Then the hallway light, the one just outside my door, flickered and went out. I froze, my fingers wrapped around my phone, its screen too dim to feel comforting. The machine kept whirring, coughing ice cubes at irregular intervals. I sat up and walked to the door, listening. Nothing from the other rooms, just that sound. I opened the door a crack. The hallway stretched empty, but cold air brushed against my face immediately, the kind of cold you feel in basements. There were no footsteps, no voices, but I felt watched, deeply, not from one direction, but from several, like the walls themselves were waiting. When I closed the door, the lock clicked louder than it should have. Back inside, the room seemed darker than before. I looked at the clock again. Still 12:03. I took a photo of it, just in case I needed to convince myself later. My phone's timestamp said 12:11. The clock hadn't moved, of course, but something else had. The bed covers were pulled down on the side I hadn't used. I know I didn't do that. I never sleep on that side when I travel. My bag, which I'd left zipped near the TV stand, was unzipped. Not open, just loosened. I stood there, heartbeat steady but cold inside my chest. It didn't feel like a break-in. It felt like the room itself was unfolding. I ended up staying awake the whole night, lights on, phone in hand. The ice machine stopped at some point. I didn't notice when. By 5:30 a.m., the hallway lights came back on. The clock above my bed never changed. At checkout, the woman at the front desk didn't ask how my stay was. She just looked at my key card, glanced up, and said, "Room 309, huh?" I asked her, quietly, if anything strange had happened in that room before. She paused, then said, "Maintenance was supposed to take that clock down. No one's been able to keep it running since 2017. Batteries die overnight. It's weird." She smiled like it was just another Denver quirk. "If anyone else has stayed in room 309 and noticed the same thing, especially the ice machine starting up at 12:03, please let me know." I still have the photo. I just don't look at it anymore. Story 7. Inherited silence. I was 17 when I inherited my father's digital alarm clock. It was the only thing of his I asked for after the funeral. Nothing sentimental. I just remembered waking up to its faint beeping during sleepovers at his place. It sat on his nightstand like a sentry. He always said it was the only clock he trusted. Now it sits on mine, quietly counting the hours since he died. The first time the screen glitched, I thought it was a power surge. I'd been half asleep, the red digits flickering like a weak pulse. 4:19 a.m. Then nothing, just a dim black rectangle for a few seconds before it reset to 12 odd a.m. and started blinking. I unplugged it, plugged it back in. Still reset. I figured it was old. Bought a new one the next day. Same thing happened. Same exact time. By the third night, I'd stopped blaming faulty wiring. There was no sound, just the stillness of my room at that hour, too quiet, like everything paused. My bedroom never felt dark before, but now the air around that clock feels thick. I started waking up minutes before it would glitch, heart racing for no reason. I'd stare at the digits, daring them to stay solid. They never did. Eventually, I mounted a tiny security camera in the corner of the room, facing my bed and the clock. I told myself it was for proof of what I didn't know. Maybe I just needed to see what I wasn't remembering. Maybe I hoped there'd be nothing. The first few nights, the footage showed me tossing, turning, nothing unusual. But on the seventh night, I saw something I can't explain. At exactly 4:19 a.m., I sat straight up in bed. My eyes were open, wide, unblinking. I stared directly at the camera. No movement, no sound, just me, perfectly still for exactly 53 seconds, then laying back down without closing my eyes. In the morning, I had no memory of it. My sheets weren't even wrinkled. I didn't watch more footage after that. I unplugged the camera and threw it into a drawer. But I didn't unplug the clock. I don't know why. Maybe it felt like that would make things worse. Or maybe I wanted to believe it wasn't the clock. But it keeps happening. Every single night. And now, even when I stay at a friend's house or a hotel, something wakes me at 4:19 a.m. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's a creak or a faint static sound, or just the feeling that I need to open my eyes. But the worst part isn't waking up. It's that I never catch myself in the act anymore. I'm always lying still, pretending I didn't just sit up again. But I know I did. I feel it in my spine, in the way my sheets are cold where they shouldn't be. I called my mom last week and asked if she remembered anything strange about Dad's clock. She hesitated. Then she said, "Your father used to wake up at that time too, almost every night. He'd just sit there looking at the wall." I didn't ask what wall. I didn't want to know if it was the same side I face now. 2 days ago, I tried sleeping without the clock. I locked it in the garage, in a box. It didn't matter. 4:19 came, and I sat up again. I know because my phone buzzed on the nightstand at exactly that moment, an accidental alarm I swear I never set. When I looked around, the room felt smaller, heavier, as if someone had just left, but not through the door. Last night I forced myself to stay awake. At 4:18 I was trembling, blanket clutched to my chest. At 4:19 the hallway light flickered on. No footsteps, no sound. Just that light, humming faintly before shutting off again. I didn't move. I couldn't. I felt like if I blinked, I'd see something standing at the edge of my bed. I'm writing this now with all the lights on, but I know it's not going to help. The silence is thicker every night, like it's waiting for me to acknowledge it. I don't know what I inherited from my dad besides that clock, but I think he tried to warn me. I just didn't listen in time. If anyone else has experienced something like this, please let me know. Am I going crazy? Story 8. Clock tower warning. I don't usually go along with Jamie's ideas, especially not the ones that start with "no one's watching." But that morning in Savannah felt oddly disconnected, like the heat hung heavier than usual, and the tourists didn't speak loud enough. When she pointed to the faded municipal building saying it was set for demolition in a week, I nodded, before I thought better of it. We slipped in through a loose plywood panel at the rear. The air inside smelled like wet insulation and stale paper. I felt my shoes stick slightly to the floor with each step. The kind of quiet pull that made you feel like the building itself wanted to keep you in. Most of the lower floors had been gutted, old desks stacked like barricades and sun-faded posters, curling off the walls. Jamie had one goal, the clock tower. We found the narrow spiral staircase tucked behind a steel fire door that screamed when I pushed it. Each step flexed under our weight, and every creak made us pause. The climb was longer than it looked from outside, and the farther up we went, the colder the air became. Despite the summer heat outside, the clock room was cramped and coated in dust. Sunlight filtered through dirty glass panels, casting amber stripes across a mass of gears and rods. Everything was frozen. I checked the clock face. The hands pointed to 10:57 a.m., unmoving. "It's been like this for years," Jamie said, brushing cobwebs from a brass lever. I stepped back to frame a photo. Just as I tapped the screen, my phone buzzed. In my hand, sharp, urgent, the emergency tone. I glanced down. Emergency alert, evacuation order, gas line breach. My stomach turned cold. Jamie raised an eyebrow. "Now?" she asked, half laughing. But I was already moving toward the stairs. We hurried down without talking, the echo of our steps faster, more chaotic. When we burst out into the sunlight, we weren't alone. People were flooding out of stores, cell phones in hand. A rumble passed under my feet like a subway train. Somewhere to our left, a distant plume of dust rose behind a line of buildings. Later that day, they said it had been an underground pipe failure. Not gas, water. A pressure valve exploded a few blocks away. No one was hurt. They even joked about the alert system being overly cautious. But something about the timing kept bothering me. I never posted the photo I took. When I opened my gallery that night, it was there, blurry, tilted. But the timestamp read 10:57 a.m. exactly. And in the lower pane of glass beneath the rusted gears was a faint smudge I hadn't noticed before, like a shape pressed from the inside. I've looked at that photo a dozen times. It always feels like it's about to move. If anyone else has been in that tower, did you notice anything odd in the glass? Or was it just me? Story 9. The hallway time loop. The clock by my aunt's bed had stopped at exactly 6:22 p.m. I thought it was just old, maybe a loose coil or a dead battery, but when I replaced it, it still didn't tick. It just sat there, the red second hand trembling faintly, never moving. She had died the night before, and I was in her apartment in Beacon Hill, sorting through her things. I hadn't been particularly close to her. She was quiet, lived alone, never had guests. But she always remembered my birthday. The apartment was thick with that stillness you only get when someone's just left a place. Dust on every surface. The smell of lavender lotion, the slight indent on the couch where she must have last sat. It was almost too intact, like she'd step back in if I turned away. I kept the windows closed. The hallway outside was too bright. The clock became a fixation. I caught myself glancing at it over and over, expecting it to change. 6:22 p.m. Always. Eventually, I just set it face down in the drawer. I didn't need any more reminders. Her heart monitor had flatlined at that exact time, confirmed in the hospital paperwork. That part didn't bother me at first. Machines stop, clocks stop, people stop. What I didn't understand was why the same thing happened to Mrs. Bell, the neighbor across the hall. I'd met her briefly while bringing down trash. She had kind eyes, thin voice, wore old pearls. She asked about my aunt. I told her the basics. That night I saw paramedics in her unit. Her niece was there, red-eyed, repeating something to the EMTs. She just collapsed, out of nowhere, at 6:22. I didn't sleep well that night. The floor creaked above me, though no one lived there. I heard a soft rhythmic tick, like a metronome, but when I searched, nothing made that sound. I kept thinking of the clock, of the way the second hand shook, like it was trying to move, but something was holding it back. The hallway light flickered once, then went steady again. I tried to leave the next morning, but the hallway felt wrong, narrower, longer than I remembered, and there was a smell I couldn't place. Not decay, not cleaning supplies. Something stale, like old breath. My shoes made no sound on the carpet. I passed Mrs. Bell's door, taped shut now, police style. But I saw something in the peephole. A shift, like someone had just moved back from it. Back inside, I tried to call my mom. My phone wouldn't connect. No service. I opened the laptop to send an email instead. 6:21 p.m. I blinked. The taskbar clock froze, then ticked to 6:22, and stopped. I restarted the system. Same thing. I picked up the travel clock from the drawer. The battery was out. Still, 6:22. I hadn't even noticed myself putting it back on the nightstand. There was knocking, 3 soft raps, then nothing. I opened. The door fast. No one. But the hallway was darker than before. The light overhead flickered again, longer this time. I stepped back, closed the door gently, and locked it without really thinking. Then the knocking resumed, slower. I didn't open it again. I sat on the edge of the bed for a while, feeling like I was being timed. The air felt dense. I could hear a faint electric hum from somewhere, too steady, too artificial. My watch had stopped now too. I took it off, put it on the floor. Every clock in the apartment read 6:22 p.m., even the oven. I tried the hallway again just after what I guessed was an hour later. It hadn't changed, but I had. I wasn't sure of my steps. I wasn't sure of the number of doors I passed. My aunt's apartment wasn't Unit 4B anymore. It said 6B, then 2B, then blank. When I turned back, the hallway just extended. No windows, no elevators, no fire exit. I don't know how many times I've walked this hallway now. The clocks still say 6:22. I think the building wants to keep me here. I hear other doors sometimes, other footsteps. I think more people are arriving. Maybe they lost someone too. Maybe they're sorting through things, just like I did. Maybe this is what comes next. If anyone's reading this and you've ever felt something wrong in a hallway, or a clock that shouldn't have stopped, please tell me. Has this happened to you? Or am I just another tick in the loop? Story 10. Estate Sale Whispers. I bought the clock because it reminded me of something from my grandfather's house. Solid wood, a little worn around the base, with brass trim dulled by age. It sat among porcelain plates and faded yearbooks at a Pasadena estate sale. No one else even glanced at it. The seller said it hadn't worked in years. I took it home for $12. That night I placed it on my bookshelf. It looked smaller in my apartment, like it was shrinking into the wall. I remember checking the time before bed, 2:54 a.m. I couldn't sleep. Around 3:03, I heard something, like air pressure shifting. Then a whisper. I thought maybe it was coming from the hallway or through the vent above my bed. Soft, steady, unintelligible. Not wind, not plumbing. I got up, checked the hallway, turned off the fan. The clock had stopped, its hands frozen exactly at 3:03. I thought that was odd, but maybe it had been stuck like that before. I tapped the glass, but the hands didn't move. The whispering had stopped. My apartment was quiet again. Too quiet. The next day, I put the clock in the garage. Not because I was scared, I told myself. It just didn't fit with the rest of my furniture. I wedged it between two storage bins and forgot about it until that night. I woke again, checked my phone, 3:03 a.m. I was sure I hadn't set an alarm. Then I heard it. One chime, low and muffled. It came from the garage. I stayed in bed. I didn't want to know if it was real. In the morning, I checked the clock. It hadn't moved, still at 3:03. I opened the back panel. It had no batteries. The mechanism was just dead. And yet I heard it. I know I did. The next few nights were the same. I stopped waking on my own. Something always pulled me out of sleep just before 3:03. Sometimes it was a chime, other times it was that whispering. Always faint, like someone was speaking through water. Once, I leaned into the vent to listen. It stopped immediately, like I'd been caught eavesdropping. I asked my upstairs neighbor if they heard anything strange. They just blinked at me, said they weren't home that week. Something about visiting a brother in Oregon. I didn't press. I didn't want to explain that I'd been keeping track of when the sounds happened, and it was always when no one else was around. One night I didn't go to bed. I stayed up watching the vent from the couch. At 3:03 exactly, the whispering came back. But this time it was more rhythmic, almost like breathing. I swear I felt something brush past my neck. I turned every light on and didn't sleep until morning. I tried getting rid of the clock. I left it at a donation bin 3 miles away. That night, the chime still came. I checked the garage the next day. It was back, sitting exactly where I had left it. The first time. I don't have an explanation for that. I still don't. Now I leave it in the garage and pretend it's not there. I don't listen to the chimes anymore. I keep my white noise machine on at night. I don't walk past the vent if I can avoid it. But some nights, even over the noise, I hear the whispers. They're not words, not exactly. More like suggestions. Sounds that nudge at your thoughts in the dark. One night, I thought I heard my name. I haven't invited anyone over since. I know how this sounds. But if anyone else has ever bought something at an estate sale and had it follow them home, please say something. I just need to know I'm not the only one. Story 11. Frozen seconds. I never used to believe in anything outside the measurable. I'm a watch technician. Precision is kind of my entire world. I calibrate micromechanical systems to the nearest tenth of a second. That's why what happened last week keeps looping in my head like a glitch I can't fix. It started with a woman who looked like she hadn't slept in days. Early 40s, designer coat, shaky hands. She brought in a 1960s Omega Seamaster. Gorgeous piece. It always stops at 9:11 p.m., she said, setting it on my counter. Every night. Then it resets itself at 6 a.m. I raised an eyebrow, trying not to smirk. She caught it. I've replaced the battery twice. It's not that. I logged her info, tagged the watch, and put it aside. Probably just a failing gear train or a magnetized balance spring. Common issues in vintage models. That afternoon, I opened it up at my bench. Nothing seemed out of place, until I noticed the second hand was ever so slightly misaligned. Not a huge deal, but off enough to bug me. I adjusted it, cleaned the movement, and set it to 3:45 p.m. The rest of the day was slow. I stayed late, catching up on some backlogs. Around 9 p.m., I was inspecting a diver's watch under the loop. That's when I noticed the temperature in the shop had dropped. Subtly at first. The AC wasn't running, no vents open. My breath didn't fog, but I felt that tight cold in my chest, like stepping into a damp cellar. Then, right at 9:11 p.m., my magnifying loupe slipped off the work lamp, followed by a slow slide of my tweezers, then the tiny screw tray. I wasn't touching the table. Everything just fell, one after another, like gravity had flickered. A static charge buzzed along my arms. I stood there, frozen, watching the second hand on the Omega. It had stopped. I reached for my phone, but it had shut off. No battery warning, nothing, just dead. I picked up the watch. The hands were locked at 9:11, just like the woman said. I reset it, placed it back, and sat down, trying to rationalize. Maybe a power surge? But we weren't even connected to anything that had caused interference. And that pressure drop, I still felt it in my ears, like cabin descent on a plane. I closed the shop early. Couldn't shake the unease. Back at home, I checked the Omega. Again, still dead. But when I went to document it on my laptop, the photos I'd taken earlier were gone. Every image of the watch, erased. Not corrupted, deleted. I know I saved them. I never don't save my work. The next morning, the Omega was ticking again. The second hand aligned. No signs of interruption. I called the customer to return it, but she didn't answer. I tried again later. Number disconnected. On impulse, I checked the shop's security footage. The timestamp on the cameras showed a glitch at 9:11 p.m. Just static for 5 seconds. No movement, no audio. When the feed resumed, I was standing there, motionless, hand midair. Like someone paused reality, then hit play. I'm logging this because I've started to notice a pattern. It's always at 9:11 p.m. My laptop freezes. My wall clock stalls for exactly 1 minute. And sometimes the Omega ticks by itself, just for that minute, then stops again. I haven't told anyone. I don't know what to say. But if anyone out there has had a watch, or anything, freeze at that same time, please tell me. Please tell me I'm not the only one. Story 12. Digital Echo. I never thought much about my bedside assistant, just a sleek little thing with a circular display and that neutral voice. I used it for alarms and weather, maybe a lo-fi playlist now and then. It wasn't until I started using a sleep tracker app that I noticed something wrong. Every night the assistant's display froze at exactly 12:41 a.m. Not off, just frozen. Then, a minute or two later, it would resume like nothing happened. At first I blamed firmware updates or bad Wi-Fi, but it wasn't random. It was always 12:41, every single night. And that's when I started digging into the app logs, synced with my phone. That's when the second detail hit me like a cold hand on the back of my neck. My phone showed signs of usage, screen on, minor scrolling, an opened app during that exact window. But I never remembered touching it. I live alone, and I'm a light sleeper. If I were waking up, I'd know, right? I started setting a second device, my tablet, to record during that time. Propped it up on a book across the room. The first night, nothing. The second, same thing. But on the third night, the recording glitched at 12:41, just like the clock. The video froze for about 90 seconds, then resumed. No noise, no movement. Just the ambient hum of the room and the soft pulse of the hallway nightlight. I replayed the moment frame by frame, squinting at every pixel. There was a shimmer just before the freeze, on the edge of the frame, near the mirror, like light refracting where it shouldn't be. Not a reflection, more like a pulse, or distortion. I told myself it was compression artifacting. I told myself lots of things that week. I tried staying awake one night just to see what would happen. I made it to 12:35 before drifting off. When I jerked awake again, it was 12:47. I felt groggy, dry-mouthed. The assistant's face had just returned to normal. I checked the phone. Chrome had been opened. A local search for how to disable digital assistants. I never typed that. The next night I left the lights on. I placed my phone in a drawer across the room. I even unplugged the assistant. Still, at 12:41, the tablet recording froze. Same time, same gap. But when the video resumed, the drawer was open and the phone was on the bed, screen faintly lit, showing my own contact page. There's something I haven't told anyone. When I was younger, about 8, I sleepwalked. Only once. I was found outside, barefoot, trying to get back inside a house I was already in. That's what my parents told me. But lately, I've been wondering if that ever really stopped. I took the assistant apart. Not much inside. A speaker, a PCB LED rings, no internal battery. No way it could run without being plugged in. And yet, 2 nights ago I woke to find it pulsing faintly red, unplugged. The voice function was disabled, but I swear I heard it whisper something before it. Blinked off. It wasn't English. It wasn't even language. I'm not sure what to do anymore. I've started locking my bedroom door from the inside. I wedge a chair against it. I keep the assistant in a drawer now, buried under sweaters. But last night, at 12:41, I woke up with it on my chest. Screen dark, cold. The sleep app shows nothing. No motion, no noise. Just a flat line from midnight to 6. But my browser history shows an Amazon tab, open to the same assistant device. 4 of them, in the cart. Has anyone else experienced something like this? Please, if you have, I need to know what's happening to me, or what's using me. Story 13. Nothing after 2:34. I bought the clock on a slow Saturday afternoon in New Orleans. The thrift store smelled like old vinyl and dust baked by sunlight through warped blinds. It was shaped like a vintage soda bottle, glossy plastic, neon red numbers, a little tick-tick sound that felt oddly comforting. I didn't need it, but it reminded me of something warm and nameless, like a diner at night or a kitchen from childhood. I hung it in the hallway outside my bedroom, just above eye level. That first night I noticed the hum, not loud but ever present, like a small animal breathing behind the drywall. I chalked it up to the transformer inside. At 2:34 a.m. it froze. The second hand just stopped. No flicker, no whine, just a halt. I thought the battery had died, but when I checked it was still warm to the touch. I replaced it anyway and went back to bed. That was the night someone tried to break into my apartment. The door chain caught barely. I heard the pressure first, metal stretching, then the soft tap of something thin scraping against the deadbolt. I didn't breathe. My phone was charging. In the kitchen. I stood there in the dark, barefoot, feeling the texture of the cold floor through my soles. No shouting, no demand. Just silence and the door moving slightly in its frame, like it was breathing. The next morning there was nothing on the security footage. Nothing at all. No movement, no figure in the hallway, not even a blip when I opened the door to check. Just blank, unbroken stillness between 2 and 3 a.m. The clock still read 2:34. I tried to laugh it off. Maybe the camera glitched. Maybe I imagined it. I took the clock down that day, but the sound stayed with me, that soft, broken hum. I started waking up at 2:34 a.m. for no reason. No noise, no dreams. Just my eyes snapping open, my body stiff, with some unformed dread. I stopped using the clock entirely, hid it in a drawer under old scarves. Then it happened again. Different night, same time. This time, it was the window. I live on the second floor. I keep that window locked at all times. But at 2:34 a.m., it was open, not wide, just enough to feel the wet breath of the city sliding in. The screen was still intact, no sign of a break-in. But I know I locked it. I always lock it. I started noticing the number everywhere. On receipts, oven timers, random Instagram timestamps. My phone froze once, 2:34 a.m. again. A friend sent me a playlist with 34 tracks, and the total runtime, 2 hours, 34 minutes. Every time it appears, I get this feeling like my brain's dipped in ice water. A pause, then panic, then silence. I moved the clock to the trash a week later. I left it outside, didn't even want it in the building. That night, I slept better, almost convinced myself it was over, until I walked to the bathroom and noticed the microwave clock had reset. 2:34. I don't dream anymore. Or maybe I do, but something cuts them off. My therapist says it could be anxiety, sleep disruption. I haven't told her about the sound I sometimes hear under my bed, a faint mechanical hum, rhythmic, like a breathing circuit. There was one night I refused to look at the time. I covered every digital screen, put tape over the bedside clock, even shut off the internet. Still, when I turned my phone back on the next morning, the screen flickered. 2:34 a.m., last active. Now I avoid the number entirely. I don't shop after midnight. I don't cook with timers. I don't watch anything that could last exactly 154 minutes. Because each time I see it, I feel like it's seeing me back. If anyone else has had a number follow them, like really follow them, please let me know. I need to know I'm not the only one this is happening to. Or if I am, what does that mean? Story 14. Grandfather's Tick. Before he left, Mr. Ellsworth shuffled over with a box wrapped in an old towel. "My father's clock," he said. "It always stops before something happens." I nodded, managing a polite smile, not quite sure what kind of something he meant. He had a hoarse way of speaking, like the words scraped on the way out. I offered to carry it for him, but he waved me off. "Just don't ignore it." Then he turned and walked slowly down the hall, not once looking back. The clock was heavy, mahogany, with a brass pendulum that swung slower than it should. It ticked with a deep wooden click that didn't quite match the seconds. I placed it on a small table in the corner of the living room near the window. The place felt too quiet after I set it down. I remember thinking irrationally that the sound filled more space than it should. That night I stayed up later than usual reading. At some point I realized the ticking had stopped. I looked up. The brass pendulum hung still at an awkward angle. The hands read 11:07. I waited for the tick to return, but it didn't. That's when my phone rang. It was my sister, her voice shaky and breathless. "I'm okay," she said immediately. "Someone tried to grab my bag outside my building. I think he thought I had a laptop or something. He ran when I screamed." She wasn't hurt, just rattled. I stayed on the line while she called the building's security. We talked for a bit. I didn't mention the clock. The next morning, the pendulum had started moving again. The hands were wrong, of course, completely off. But it ticked, as if nothing had happened. I adjusted the time. I told myself it was just coincidence, an old mechanism. Unreliable. 3 days later, it stopped again. 2:43 a.m. I was asleep but woke up feeling like something was pressing on my chest. Not in a medical way, just wait. I got up, checked the time, and there it was. 2:43. Still, silent. The rest of the apartment felt oddly charged, like static after a storm. At 2:49, I got a message. My downstairs neighbor asking if I'd heard the crash. Her living room. Window had shattered from the outside. Nothing was taken, and there were no footprints in the garden bed. Police didn't find anything. She was shaken. So was I, but I didn't say why. I began watching the clock like a ritual. Its ticking became a kind of dread. If it kept ticking, I could breathe. If it stopped, I didn't know what would follow. One afternoon, I caught myself flinching every time the second hand lagged. I hadn't been sleeping much. I tried moving it into the closet. The silence made it worse. I brought it back out. At least when I heard it, I knew it wasn't warning me. One evening, I was watching a documentary with the volume low. The clock stopped. 6:31 p.m. My heart dropped. I stared at it for a long time. Nothing happened. Then I heard the knock. 3 slow taps on my front door. I didn't answer. I didn't move. They didn't come again. I'm not sure what's worse, the things that happen after it stops, or the things that don't. That silence, waiting to be filled. The sound of the ticking returned at 7:12. I hadn't moved from the couch. I still don't know if someone was really there. I haven't told anyone. I don't know what I'd even say. A clock is predicting things. Doesn't sound sane, but I keep it wound. I check it hourly. Right now, it's ticking. It's 10:58 p.m. I'm just sitting here, waiting to see if it stops. Have you ever had something in your home warn you, quietly, persistently, about things no one else could feel? If you've seen anything like this, please tell me. I don't think I can be the only one. Story 15. No Time to Die. I've never liked silence. That heavy kind that settles when the fridge hum dies, when the buzz of street lamps vanishes. Last Thursday, LA went dark. Complete blackout. No sirens, no traffic, just me in my apartment with a single candle and an old carriage clock I'd picked up from a flea market the week before. The flame trembled. The clock sat still. 9:06 p.m. Same as earlier. Same as always lately. It was the second time it had stopped that week. I'd assumed it was just old. Those ornate hands and the winding key in the back gave it charm, but not reliability. Still, I liked hearing it tick at night. That soft, deliberate click. It made the place feel less empty. But now, tickless and dim, the apartment felt hollow. The shadows didn't shift. They waited. I was thinking about digging out my phone for a flashlight when the low boom came. Not sharp, more like the earth exhaling. The window panes rattled. I froze. A second later, a soft whoosh of light lit the skyline beyond my building. Orange, then black again. Gas main explosion, they'd say later, just 2 blocks away. The candle shivered, the flame stretching sideways, as if something invisible passed by. I blinked and looked at the clock. Still 9:06. The minute hand hadn't moved. Neither had I. I walked closer. The brass casing reflected the flame in a smeared halo. My fingers reached for the dial, hesitated. There was a smell. Burnt copper. Maybe ozone. Not gas. Different. The kind of scent you notice just before a thunderstorm, and the air felt heavier, like walking into a room where someone just left and the tension still lingers. That's when I noticed the tick. Faint. Not from the clock, though. Behind me, in the hallway. I turned quickly, nearly snuffing the candle with my breath. The hallway was empty, of course. Dim light from neighboring windows barely outlined the edges of my door. No sound now, no ticking, but I swear something had mimicked it. A deliberate mechanical rhythm. Back inside, I sat on the floor, candle in front of me, watching the clock. I whispered aloud, just once. Start. I don't know why. Maybe part of me thought it would respond, that it was waiting for some cue. It didn't tick, but I swear the flame pulled toward it. I stayed there, watching, until the candle burned halfway down. Sometime after that, I noticed movement in the reflection of the glass face. Not in the room, just the reflection. A silhouette behind me, near the hallway. No detail, just enough to raise every hair on my arm. I turned. Again, nothing, but the candle had burned lower, and now the shadows looked taller. When I turned back to the clock, the hands had moved. 9:07 p.m. Only 1 minute forward. I didn't sleep that night, or the next. The power returned by morning, but I haven't used light since. Not really. I keep candles now, and the clock, on the mantle. It always stops at 9:06, until something, some presence, I don't know, comes near. Then it moves forward. 1 minute. Always one. If anyone else has something that stops the moment they enter the room, if you felt that pressure, like time itself hesitating, please let me know. Am I the only one watching the seconds resist? Story 16. Static hour. I've always liked working night shifts. There's something calming about the quiet, the dim glow of the studio lights, the city asleep around me. I run the late night slot at a small, low-budget radio station just outside Cleveland. It's mostly automated playlists and pre-recorded segments with a few live check-ins. It suits me fine. I don't mind the solitude. A few weeks ago, I found an old analog clock in the break room cabinet. One of those vintage ones with a loud ticking sound and numbers that glow faintly in the dark. It had a bit of dust on it, but it still worked. I brought it into the main studio, thinking it added a little charm to the otherwise sterile room. I set it next to the mixing console, where I could glance at it during songs. The first time it stopped, I didn't think much of it. I looked up from my notes and saw the hands frozen at 1:01 a.m. I tapped the glass, wound it a little, and it started ticking again. Just old clock stuff. But the second night it happened. Same time, same pause. I felt a small chill crawl across the back of my neck. That night, while staring at the frozen hands again, I noticed something strange in the headphones. Usually there's silence between tracks, but there was static, faint at first, like a distant whisper, then a short, sharp breath. Just one, not mine, not through the mic. It was close, like someone was leaning in right beside me. I took the headset off immediately. The silence in the studio was absolute, too absolute. Even the humming from the air vents seemed muffled, like the room itself was holding its breath. I checked the control board. Everything was normal, scheduled. Playlist running, light steady, no active mic feed. The next night I left the clock unplugged, just to see. At 1:01 a.m. the headset hissed again. Same static, same breath. and the clock, despite having no power, had stopped at exactly 1:01. I hadn't even noticed until after I yanked the headphones off and turned on every overhead light in the studio. I told my manager about it the next morning, trying to keep my tone casual. He laughed, said the station had quirks, old wiring, occasional audio bleed, some story about a signal bouncing back from the tower. But when I asked if anything weird had happened at 1:01 before, he just shrugged and changed the subject. Since then, I've kept a log. The breath always happens when I'm alone. If the intern's here or someone's cleaning, the clock ticks right through, no static, no breath. But if it's just me, every time without fail, 1:01 a.m. The tick stops, the breath arrives, one inhale, that's all, like someone just woke up behind me. Last night I tried recording it. I set up a direct line from the headset to my laptop, hit record around 12:58. At 1:01 the clock froze again. The breath came, sharp and sudden. I stopped the recording, backed it up, hit play. Nothing. Just silence. No static. No breath. But I swear I felt it, close enough to stir the hairs on my arm. I didn't sleep when I got home. I kept thinking about how precise it is, how deliberate, like a reminder or a rehearsal. And tonight, I have the shift alone again. I thought about calling in sick, but part of me wants to know what happens if I speak back or breathe in return. If anyone else has worked night shifts like this, if you've ever heard something that shouldn't be there just after midnight, please tell me. Am I the only one stuck in the static hour? Story 17. Wrong. Time right. Place. The watch always stops at 7:16 p.m. Not a minute earlier or later. A delicate piece from the 1930s, gold casing, faded numerals, leather strap cracked with age. I bought it at an estate sale 2 years ago. Owner deceased, no family. I don't wear it to keep time, obviously. I wear it because it feels significant, a relic with memory. But last week, that watch made me question more than time. The gallery opening was in a converted warehouse downtown. High ceilings, exposed beams, ambient jazz humming through the speakers. I remember the chill from the concrete floor seeping through my shoes. Wine glasses clinked and people drifted between installations like sleepwalkers. I brought the watch with me out of habit. Not on my wrist, never on my wrist, but in my coat pocket. At 7:15 p.m., I reached for it. I don't know why. Maybe instinct, maybe the weight felt different. I glanced at it. The second hand ticked toward the minute, 7:16. It stopped, precisely, silently. A moment later, the fire alarm screamed through the building. There was no panic, just confusion. Gallery staff ushered us out calmly. A small kitchen fire, they said, contained quickly. I stood outside. With the others, coat collar pulled up, watch still frozen in my hand. Most people were already laughing about it. I almost did too until I saw him. Tall gray coat, thinning hair. Across the street near the bus shelter, staring at his wristwatch, not looking around, just staring, focused. Then he looked up. Not at me directly, but near me, past me. His expression didn't change. He tucked the watch away and walked off without saying a word. That should have been it. A weird man in a weird moment. But I've seen him twice since then. First, outside a subway station. I was exiting. He was standing still, again watching the time. When I passed him, I saw the exact same watch I own. Same design, same fading. The second time was outside, my office building. I wasn't wearing the watch that day. It was still at home, still stuck at 7:16. But he was there. And this time, he looked straight at me. I don't believe in premonitions. I'm not superstitious. But that night I left the watch in a drawer and drove aimlessly for an hour, avoiding clocks, phones, anything with numbers. At 7:16 I parked in a random lot behind a supermarket and sat still. Nothing happened. No alarms, no fires, just silence. But when I got home, the watch wasn't where I left it. It was on the kitchen table, and it was ticking. I keep it locked away now. But sometimes late at night I hear a faint ticking from the drawer. It stops abruptly, always around the same time. If anyone else has had something like this happen, or if you recognize that man, please tell me. Am I just imagining things? Or is there something I'm supposed to do at 7:16? Story 18. Missing 402. Every morning before we open the cafe, I have a routine. Lights on, unlock the back door, check the thermostat, and glance at the wall clock behind the register. I never really thought about that last part, just something I always do. But last Tuesday when I looked up, the clock was frozen at 4:02 a.m. That's what started all of this. At first I thought the battery had died, but the second hand was twitching, stuck like it wanted to move but couldn't. The air felt colder than usual. Our heater is old, so I blamed that, swapped the batteries, and went on prepping the pastries. But something itched at me, a little splinter of discomfort that didn't go away. Around noon, when the rush died down, I remembered we had security, cameras. Just curiosity, I told myself. Just wanted to know how long the clock had been like that. I pulled up the footage from early that morning, fast forwarded to 4 a.m., hit play, and that's when I saw him. He was standing outside the front door, not moving, not pacing, just standing, facing in. The lights were off, doors locked, no cars in the lot, but there he was, tall, thin, wearing a gray coat that hung too long over his wrists. His face was off, blurry, not out of focus, just indeterminate, like my eyes couldn't settle on his features. He stood there for a full minute. At 4:02 on the dot, the clock behind me froze on the feed. The second hand jumped once more, then stopped. At that exact moment, the man tilted his head to the side. Not like he was curious, more like he was listening. I felt a chill run up my spine, sitting there in the break room, staring at the screen. I rewound it, played it again. Same moment, 4:02, same head tilt. I zoomed in, tried enhancing the image, even though I know that doesn't work, like in movies. But still, no face. Just smudged skin, like someone wiped the camera with something oily. I checked the outside cameras next. From the angle near the dumpster, you should be able to see the man clearly. But on that feed, nothing. Just an empty parking lot. No figure, no motion. I skipped to 4:03, still empty. Only the camera inside showed him. And only for that 1 minute. That night, I asked my manager if he'd seen anything weird. He laughed it off, said I needed more sleep. Maybe he was right. I told myself not to think about it anymore. Until the next day. Wednesday, morning, same routine. I opened up, turned on the lights, checked the clock, still 4:02, frozen. Even though I'd replaced the batteries, even though I watched it twitch the day before. This time, the second hand didn't move at all, and worse, when I looked up, I swore I saw something in the window, a shape just for a second, gone the moment I blinked. I didn't check the cameras again. I didn't want to. Thursday, I came in early. 3:50 a.m. I don't know why, just a feeling. I parked across the street, sat in my car with the engine running, watched the entrance. At 4:01, the lot was empty. At 4:02, my headlights flickered, just once, and then I saw it. A shadow against the glass. Long, thin, leaning in. I never saw him arrive, never saw him leave. He was just there, and then he wasn't. I don't know what happened at 4:02. I don't remember hearing anything. There's a blank space in my mind around that time. Just silence and a faint ringing, like a tone right at the edge of hearing. The clock was gone on Friday. Just missing. No note, no explanation. Manager said he didn't touch it. No one else was scheduled. I tried to laugh it off, but I check the wall every morning now, just in case. And sometimes, when I'm alone, I feel like someone's watching me through the glass, always at 4:02. If anyone else has ever had something freeze at a specific time, especially something like this, please tell me. I need to know I'm not the only one. Story 19. Reverse countdown. I found it in a rusted metal box tucked behind old uniforms and photo albums in my dad's attic. The thing looked like it belonged in a submarine. Solid steel casing, cold to the touch with faded military markings. A wind-up timer, the kind you twist until it ticks back to 0. I didn't even think it worked at first, but when I turned the dial, it clicked softly and stopped at exactly 8:45 p.m. That's when I heard the footsteps, slow, deliberate, right on the wooden porch outside. I was alone in the house. Dad passed last winter, and I hadn't gotten around to cleaning out everything. I froze at the sound, holding the timer in my hand like it was responsible. When I checked the front door, there was no one there, no cars on the street, just the creak of wood settling. I chalked it up to paranoia. Old houses do that. But the next day, in my apartment, I wound it again, just to see. Again, it stopped at 8:45 p.m., not a second before or after. And again, footsteps. Only this time, I was on the 3rd floor of a secured building. I heard them coming down the hallway. Slow and measured, stopping right outside my door. I didn't open it. I just stood there, heart pounding, until the silence returned. I haven't told anyone. It sounds insane, but it doesn't matter where I am. Motel in Nevada, Airbnb in Maine. Every time I wind that timer, I hear those same damn steps. Always at 8:45. Always approaching, but never entering. It's not even the sound itself that gets to me. It's the certainty, the inevitability, like something's keeping track. The timer doesn't let me choose a time. I can twist it from any angle, any direction. It resets itself and lands back at 8:45. And I've tried not winding it. For a week straight, I left it alone. The footsteps didn't come. But then I started hearing a faint ticking anyway, even from another room, even when I'd hidden it. Last night I tried throwing it away. I drove out to the edge of town, tossed it into a ditch, and didn't look back. At 8:45, the footsteps came again, except this time, they didn't stop at the door. I swear I heard the floorboards creak inside the house. Just one step, enough to freeze me in place. I went back this morning. The timer was on my kitchen table. No dirt, no scratches, just ticking. It's 8:32 now. I can hear it from the other room, winding itself. If anyone else has experienced something like this, please let me know. Am I going crazy? Story 20. The wrist that knew. I've bought watches before. Cheap ones, broken ones, some with initials etched on the back that I never cared to research. But the Omega Seamaster was different. It came from an estate sale, leather band barely creased, glass flawless. The second I clasped it on, I felt heavier, not physically, just present, like something noticed I'd put it on. I wore it for the first time during a business trip back from D.C. The Amtrak was half full, humming gently, the smell of coffee and winter coats thick in the air. I had my earbuds in, a podcast droning on about Cold War espionage, but I heard the ticking, loud, sharper than usual, like it was echoing under my skin. I checked the face a few times. It matched my phone at first, 6:28 p.m., 6:29. Then the ticking faltered, slowed. It stopped, precisely at 6:31 p.m. I tapped the glass, adjusted the crown. Nothing. Just silence where there'd been insistence. Seconds later, the train screamed. It wasn't a gradual breaking. It was jarring, metallic, unnatural. Coffee flew from paper cups. A suitcase slid down the aisle. Then the announcement, muffled, shaken. A passenger in the second car had collapsed. Medical emergency. We were being held indefinitely. The woman across from me stared at my wrist. I remember that detail because her eyes flicked to it right before she asked the time. I raised it instinctively. "It's stuck," I muttered. 6:31. She paled slightly, said nothing more. They evacuated that passenger. No one around me knew what had happened exactly, just that there was blood, a lot of it, and someone screaming something about his eyes. No one wanted to talk about it. We were delayed for 40 minutes. The train didn't feel the same afterward. The lights seemed dimmer, conversations quieter. My watch remained still. A beautiful, perfect Omega. Dead. Back home, I left it on my dresser. That night, I dreamed of screeching metal and cold breath on the back of my neck. I woke up at 6:31 a.m. The room was silent, but I swear I heard a soft click. The second hand had moved, just once. I took it to a watchmaker the next day. He opened it slowly, careful fingers brushing along the gears. "It's immaculate," he said. "Nothing's wrong, but this spring looks like it's been under tension, like it froze mid-motion." I didn't wear it again, but I didn't throw it out either. It sits by the window now. I still catch it ticking sometimes, only briefly, always when something feels off, like when the power flickers, or when my dog growls at the empty hallway. If anyone has experienced something like this, please let me know. Am I just projecting, or does this thing know when something's about to happen?